What's up, everyone? Welcome to the first weekly book club stream. This is something that I'm going to start doing on Sundays specifically. That's the one I'm dedicating the time slot to. So we're going to be just basically discussing a book that we're reading. What's up again, Shark? Welcome. So this week's book, as I mentioned last week, which is when I first announced this, is A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle, or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I've compiled some notes, just some talking points. If you've read the book, then great. You'll probably get a lot more out of this stream than people who haven't. But if you haven't, maybe we can get you to read it. Maybe you'll enjoy it. Yeah. So let's just get it started. This is going to be a bit of a stranger or more relaxed stream as well, because I've never done this, just pure talking. Usually I've had something to do, whether it's playing a game or that one time I drew. That was pretty fun. Anyway, we have Pokemon music in the background, literally relaxing Pokemon music volume 1 by Striped Sounds, and then some Japanese characters that I wish I could read. I can at least tell you that they're mostly katakana, but yeah. Hello, Catherine. It's really been playing Pokemon League Night for a while now. I actually kind of wanted to move on to the next song. Let's get it to move on to the next song. There we go. Anyway, let's get it started. Why don't we? I don't know if anyone who's here has read A Study in Scarlet, but it is the first Sherlock Holmes novel of 4 and several short stories, over 50 short stories. I think it's about 56, but I can't remember if that's just the number that are in the public domain or not. Anyway, most of the Sherlock Holmes franchise is in the public domain, but not all of it. Josh, my dream is to become a competitive COD mobile player, but I have to get to legendary rank in ranked matches. I don't know anything about COD, so I don't play any Call of Duty unless like I'm at a friend's house or anything, so I don't have much to say about that. But A Study in Scarlet is the first appearance of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, which is quite significant because they're like the most iconic duo in all of detective fiction. That's strange. Am I live still? It says I'm offline, but I don't think that's true. What the heck? Okay. My dashboard was just lying to me. Or something went wrong, but I don't know. I hope everything went fine. I hope nothing bad happened. Anyway, it was published in 1887. It's not very long, by the way. You could probably read it during the stream, and I don't know if you'd finish it, but you'd get quite far. So yeah, it was the first appearance of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, the most iconic. Let's talk about detective fiction for a little bit as a genre before we get into the specifics of the actual novel. So detective fiction is like one of my favorite genres in general. I like is that chess or cheese? Twitch TV, Braden Spamzel? I'm sorry if I'm not getting that quite right. Yeah, okay. Everyone sit down and grab cheese. Okay. I'm happy for you. I mean, I like cheese in small amounts. Can't really make a meal of it. Anyway, so we're discussing A Study in Scarlet. You can just relax in the back, leave the stream if you're not interested, or just leave it in the background and listen to my voice and some Pokemon music. I'm probably going to be looking at the camera a lot more than I usually do. But no, thanks for the follow. Twitch TV Braden, is it fine? I'm just going to say Twitch TV Braden. So, detective fiction. Let's give a little bit of insight into that genre as a whole. So, it's a very popular genre. First of all, it's been around since. Well, it's a bit disputed how long it's been around, but it was certainly popularized by the Sherlock Holmes novels, or brought into the mainstream by the Sherlock Holmes stories. However, before that, a lot of people cite, why is the PC just absolutely freaking out today? What the heck? Can you read it to us? I'm not going to read it on stream. But my goodness, my whole display just started flashing. That was terrifying. So, a lot of people point to Edgar Allan Poe as the first perpetuator of modern detective fiction, with his short story The Murders in the Rue Morgue. And that had the character of C. Auguste Dupin, if you want to say it in a French accent. It is spelled French, like in a very French way, but Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer. I haven't personally read that story from 1841. It's in my library, but I don't know if it's pronounced in that French way or not. However, also you seem quite nervous. I'm not quite sure how to run this, so you know, I hope people enjoy it regardless, but I'm going to just keep speaking until I'm used to it without a game. I usually rely on the game as a bit of a crutch. But anyway, so a lot of people will point to The Murders in Rue Morgue as like the first modern piece of detective fiction. But there are a lot of things that inspired it, and in a lot of countries there are some traces of what would become the detective fiction genre, or the Edgar Allan Poe referred to it as ratio. I should have written down the word. Ratiocinatation. Is that? Let me. Ratiocinatation. Ratiocination. There you go. That's the genre he described as. And he wrote an entire essay on how you construct a story in that way. Yes, I do have water with me. Thank you for asking. Why is it flashing so much? This is terrifying. I'm worried that my entire setup is just going to die at one point. Anyway, that story has been potentially inspired by an 1819 story. So this is quite a long time ago, called Das Fräulein von Scuderi. I don't know, it's German. That's one of the earlier examples of European or Western detective fiction, and it is a potential influence for The Murders in the Rue Morgue. But another one is The Secret Call by Williams Evans Burton. I didn't say who wrote Das Fräulein von Scuderi, which was E.T.A. Hoffman. Can I drink? No, you can't drink my water. You should have brought your own. No, you're not. Anyway. The door's locked, so, I mean, yeah. So those are really early 1800s examples of detective fiction, but there are even earlier examples of sort of that deductive, analytical reasoning in fiction, in Oedipus Rex, which I believe was by Sophocles. I should have checked. I should have written down if it was by Sophocles. But I think it was. Okay, I'll be scared. Then in 1001 Nights, or 1001 Arabian Nights, which is a collection of sort of folk tales from the Arabs, there are a lot of things involving that type of detective work or reasoning. I think one of them has the character Jafar threatened by, I believe it's the Sultan, to solve a murder within 3 days or he'll die. Something like that. Yeah, wait behind the drum kit. It's very skeletal, so I don't see you there. And there's also a very early example of it in Western, in like traditional Western fiction, called Zadig by Voltaire. And that is from I believe it's 1749. I didn't write down all the details because I just wanted to, just have a few talking points and then springboard off them. But anyway, now that you have a bit of an idea of the history of the detective fiction genre, maybe we could talk a little bit about what actually happens in it. There's usually a main character, and often they point to Edgar Allan Poe as the person who perpetuated this formula, which has since... I'm wearing my beanie. I've checked now several times, but it has since inspired like the procedural genre of crime shows, crime TV, and a lot of spin-off things like noir and hard-boiled occultic detective fiction. There are a lot of mystery things, but it inspired authors like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie, to name a few, and then like it spread across the world into things even including like Ace Attorney, which is by I should know that, but I can't remember. Anyway, so Sherlock Holmes became like the biggest popular character within that genre, along with his partner, Dr. Watson. And this was, it was in the late 1800s, but it wasn't immediately popular, is also the other thing. But the stories were continually published, and then they eventually grew to be more popular. So it was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who himself was a medical doctor. And that's very interesting because that gave him a background in like anatomy and understanding the body. And so it also meant that he was quite smart as well. He got his thesis, or he wrote his thesis, sorry, or dissertation. Yes, dissertation on it's a certain condition that arises from, I believe, like an infection from your spine or something. I can't remember the exact thing. It was very technical. But some fun facts about him. His first published story, which was The Mystery of Sasasa Valley, it was set in South Africa, which is where I am, so that's quite interesting. And then another interesting thing is that he supported mandatory vaccinations. He said vaccinations are very important. Don't say otherwise. He got quite angry at anti-vaxxers. So yeah, there you go. Even a doctor from the 1800s knew that vaccinations were important. Yeah, so with that kind of out of the way, we can talk more about the actual story, A Study in Scarlet, and the other Sherlock Holmes stories, though I haven't read really any others from the original canon, other than A Study in Scarlet, which is the first of 4, as I think I mentioned earlier, and it's followed by The Sign of the Four, which is a little bit confusing, but it is the second one. Anyway, so fun bit of trivia before we get into the actual nitty and gritty of A Study in Scarlet is that Holmes was the first fictional detective to use a magnifying glass, and that's why it's so like closely related to his imagery. Like when you think of Sherlock Holmes, you usually think of the funny little hunting hat, or deer hunting hat. I don't know exactly what it's called, and you think of the magnifying glass. It's weird that I was reading a little bit of a paper on it earlier, but it's kind of weird that Edgar Allan Poe didn't give his detectives a magnifying glass, because he was quite obsessed with like the eyes and optical things. He talks about it a lot in his short stories and poems, like it comes up, the way he plays with vision. And he spoke about how closely related analyzing things was to seeing them correctly, like measuring them correctly. So it's very strange that he never gave them a magnifying glass. I think in one story, to better perceive a crime scene, one of the detectives or one of the investigators gets a mirror and tries to look at the house from the mirror, and that doesn't really help. So this is quite strange, but that's a fact that Sherlock Holmes was the first fictional detective to use a magnifying glass. Now he so closely identified detective fiction with the magnifying glass that it's almost strange that no one had done it before. Because as I've pointed out, there were quite a few examples of detectives and investigators before Sherlock Holmes in fiction. Anyway, so the story itself, which is centered around, well, the opening chapters are more about Watson meeting Sherlock Holmes. It has been a little while since I've read it. I got a little bit of a refresher today, just on the synopsis, basically. But I read it a couple months ago. So I might be wrong with the details, but I have my Kindle here. It's open on the story, so I can always read it if I need to, if I need any specific references. So the story itself starts with describing Watson, and this is very cool. I'm just going to be talking about it because I don't think anyone else has read it that's on stream. But yeah, so we meet Watson, who's this military doctor who's now been honorably discharged, or he's ended his tour in Afghanistan, and he needs a place to stay. And I believe at the start he's like doesn't have a lot of money and he's been drinking a lot, which is quite interesting because we often in the portrayals of Watson see him as this very straight edge, no nonsense counterpart to Sherlock, who's a little bit more, or who's depicted as being a little bit more eccentric. But he's, in reality, or in this first appearance at least, quite a slob, speaking of Watson. Which is very amusing to me. We'll talk about adaptations a little bit later in the stream, I think. There are some things I want to talk about, specifically about Sherlock and the BBC show. But anyway, so that's the first thing that happens. We are introduced to Watson, and he goes to an old medical colleague of his. And in his lab, he meets this gentleman, Sherlock Holmes, who happens to be analyzing something about bruising. Is that in the Sherlock? I can check it now if I want to. Let me see. I think he's checking something about what happens to a body after it's had some time to decompose. Also, what's very interesting is that Sherlock is rather polite in a way, or at least he's considerate, which is not how he's often portrayed. There are several instances throughout the story. The first thing is when he meets Watson and brings himself up as a candidate for his roommate. He says, and here I have the quote, for me it's on page 12, but he says, "Let me see, what are my other shortcomings? I get in the dumps at times and don't open my mouth for days on end. You must not think I am sulky when I do that. Just let me alone and I'll soon be right. What have you to confess now?" So anyway, so he's already talking about like his shortcomings, like he's not a complete, he doesn't have this idea of himself as like the perfect man, of like how everyone should act and everything. He's less vain. He's confident, but he's less vain. Anyway, what is he actually doing? Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Sorry, I'm just reading it to find the exact thing that I need. It's that he found that if there's a trace of blood, he found a way to detect it using a chemical reaction. That's exactly what he did. That's not quite what is portrayed in some of the other media. That's why I got confused beforehand. But he basically had a way of testing for blood. Or testing if something is blood. And then there's some remarks about how it seems like a very delicate test, but you know, it's fine. So the whole thing is that this man, this Sherlock Holmes, he's dedicated his life to solving crimes specifically, not just solving puzzles or not being analytical. It's specifically oriented to criminal investigation, essentially, and forensics. And there's a wonderful little thing by Watson, because the whole thing is written, not the whole thing, kind of the whole thing. The whole thing is written as a sort of account from his perspective and his writings on the matter. We will get into how the second half isn't quite that, but I mean, we will get there when we get there. So here we are. in his little journal, or whatever he's writing this on, in his memoirs, he says, Sherlock Holmes, his limits. 1. Knowledge of literature, nil. No knowledge of literature, doesn't read literature. 2. Knowledge of philosophy, nil. Doesn't know anything about philosophy. 3rd, knowledge of astronomy, nil. And this is kind of a running joke, is that he didn't know that the Earth revolves around the sun. Because he didn't care. And they make a nod to that in the 3rd episode of season 1 of Sherlock. I rewatched that relatively recently, so that's why I can recall it quite well. But yeah, they really make him... We'll talk about it later. We still have plenty of time in the stream. Anyway, knowledge of politics, feeble. Not interested in politics. Knowledge of botany, variable. Well up in belladonna, opium, and poisons generally. Knows nothing of practical gardening, which is interesting because Arthur Conan Doyle himself was quite the botanist, specifically in practical gardening. He knew quite a bit about it. Then knowledge of geology, practical but limited. Tells at a glance different soils from each other. After walks has shown me splashes upon his trousers and told me by their colour and consistency in what part of London he had received them. That's the other thing. He's also very focused on London. He cares the most about his city, basically. It's kind of like how Batman is a part of Gotham City, and Gotham City is a part of Batman. Like, London is a part of him. He knows the maps, he knows the underground network, he knows about where all those soils and everything will be in. So it's very interesting to see that. He is something of a more idealized hero in this initial work. I don't know when it's necessarily revealed that he does drugs. I think it's hinted at in this first one. But I mean, he does seem like a much more like a genius in this field and a bit of a dope in others, but otherwise relatively harmless. Anyway, his knowledge of chemistry is profound. It is mentioned that he's not a chemistry student, but it seemed like he was. Knowledge of anatomy, accurate but unsystematic, which is interesting. Did I bookmark that? Whoops. Knowledge of sensational literature, immense. He appears to know every detail of every horror perpetrated in the century. I don't know precisely what sensational literature is, but I think that basically talks about it. I think that basically just speaks to news. He knows about a lot of the cases that predate his own career, which is very interesting. He's so focused on it. It's quite interesting. And there's a great quote by him. I'll find it now, but after we finish this list. Plays the violin well. That's always nice. They always talk about that. Although sometimes it's a viola. Anyway, is an expert single-stick player, boxer, and swordsman. A strange obsession with combat. I think it's more for like knowing where an attacker would hit and probably being able to figure out what happened in a situation rather than actually using it. Although in something like Elementary, they make quite a point of his, well, they make a bit of a point of his combat skills, and he uses it to torture and beat some people every now and then, if you've ever watched Elementary. Elementary is a pretty good adaptation of the series, I think. It's an interesting one. I don't know if I prefer to Sherlock. I might prefer to Sherlock. But it's in the more procedural genre, whereas Sherlock is just drama, like a mystery drama. And has a good practical knowledge of British law. Naturally, he wants to help law enforcement. So, let me find that quote I was talking about. Yes, so it's basically when Watson is reading the article that Sherlock has written and says, wow, that's nonsense. But it will pivot nicely onto my next point, which I'll get to in a second. But the one I wanted to quote here is that he talks about how he depends on his deductive skills to earn his keep, to earn a living. But he says, Talks about that. There's that thing. That's what I'll talk about in a second. Sorry about this. This is a little bit awkward. I should have bookmarked my pages a bit better, but I didn't expect to be doing so much talking. Where is it that he says this? And it's quite a nice quote. It basically says that it's an art. Deduction's like an art, but you can't master it in a lifetime. Okay, well, I can't find it right now. I think I'm in the right area, but I just can't find the exact quote. But while we're here, we can talk about how okay, so Watson says, this is the next point I'm just gonna talk about because I can't find that quote. Anyway, so this novel is set in a very strange, strangely realistic sense, in that it's intertextual, or its intertextuality acknowledges the works as books, and it talks about things that are set in the real world. Let's see. Yeah, it references a lot of real people and characters, which is quite bold. But Arthur Conan Doyle was also a historical fiction writer, so he really enjoyed setting things in a more accurate, realistic setting. So, the one I wanted to read here was when Watson says, "You remind me of Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin." And then later he says, have you read Gaboureau's, it's French, works. So that talks about the Monsieur Lecoq, it's French. I haven't spoken French in a long time, and I was never fluent in it. But anyway, so you can see like he references these actual books. It's quite amusing in some way, and Sherlock belittles them. He is like, those guys do it very strangely. They don't do it the way I do. Yeah, it's very present. It's very much written for the times, yet it's still in a way timeless. It's quite interesting. So, I suppose that's the mark of a good novel. Yeah, I don't know what the next thing I want to talk about is. We can continue talking about the structure. So, he, being Watson, meets Sherlock. They start being flatmates. And Watson is still a slob. He gets up quite late, at least compared to Sherlock. It's quite funny. And Sherlock, I'll add to my previous statement that he's quite considerate. At one point, it's mentioned that when he's lost in thought, he'll just lay his violin on his leg and just like play some chords without any real sort of structure. And it's meant to just like sort of reflect his thinking at the time, how he's feeling. But Watson says, this would annoy me, but he always, right after doing this, plays some of my favorite tunes. Or, goes through his favorites. So, he doesn't want to be so much of a burden to Watson in this. He wants to, like, for every bad thing that he does, he makes up for it. And I don't know if that changes in later stories. I'd like to find out. But my statement on the matter at the moment, having only read this one, is that it seems like Sherlock is quite a nice guy, all things considered. But he's not very emotional. Yeah. Watson is still sort of the emotional crutch. You can even see it here. He understands normal people more. He's the bridge for the reader. Okay, next thing. So they meet each other. They're staying in the flat together, and then Sherlock has to help Lestrade. And they go to the house on, I believe it's Braxton. Oh no, I didn't write a summary of the exact names and places. Oh, some of them I did write down, but we'll get to that. So they go to the house where the murder is believed to have taken place. He analyzes it, and he uses a tape measure and a magnifying glass. I saw on one of those papers that there's like significance to the fact that he takes out a magnifying glass and a tape measure from the same pocket. It's just meant to relate to like exactness and how you need to take the correct details before you can make the correct deductions. I believe. I believe that was the crux of it. I don't think it was much deeper than that. So then afterwards, they recover a wedding ring, and they spend some time just like going over the case and trying to figure things out. The whole first half, or first part rather, is written from Watson's perspective. It's literally called, I think it's called Watson's Reminiscences. And so we're just learning about how Sherlock does this thing in the first half along with Watson. And then an old lady, or someone who's dressed like an old lady, steals the ring. She takes it and leaves from an ad. Then Sherlock arrives at the conclusion. I'm trying to remember it as well, sorry. With some deduction and whatnot, and sending his sort of gang of street orphans out there. He calls them something specific. I think street Arabs or something like that. He sends them out. They collect some information for him, and they bring a taxi driver back. And he's arrested on the spot because Lestrade and the other inspector is there. So the other inspector are there. So they arrest him, and then he lunges at them, and it has a very exciting little ending for the first part. Then the second part, which is more what I want to talk about, is basically historical fiction. And it's just set way back before the actual crime is committed, and talks about a man and a girl who are saved by a bunch of Mormons in the desert in America, in Utah. And it talks about the formation of Salt Lake City, and brings up Brigham Young, who was one of the prominent figures in the Mormon faith, or the Church of Latter-day Saints. And we can talk about Doyle's depiction of Mormonism, because it did go under a bit of scrutiny. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. But what this whole section of the novel does is it delivers quite an engaging tale out in the early America. It's relatively early America, yeah. And it has its own drama and its own characters that are quite interesting. It has its own mystery elements, like how every day that one of the characters is pushed to make a decision, as the days are counting down, the number of days remaining. Que pasa, padre? I don't speak Spanish, but I'm gonna try to guess what that means. Juan, I'm guessing. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, but what's up? We were just talking about studying Scarlet. Anyway, so yes, as the days count down to this man's decision, his name is Ferrier. Yes, Argentina. Oh, okay, nice. Wait, so is that Spanish or Portuguese then? I honestly don't know. I'd love to be educated on the matter, because I don't know enough about either language. But I think Portuguese is spoken in Argentina. You can correct that for me if I'm wrong. It just shows I'm not caught up on all my geography. But yeah, so this gentleman Ferrier, who has an adopted daughter named Lucy, who he doesn't want to marry a Mormon. Do you know where is? Do you know where is? Argentina. I don't know if I entirely understand the question. But yes. I believe so. I don't know, now I'm doubting myself. Anyway, so he doesn't want Lucy to marry a Mormon, even though that they've adopted a Mormon faith and lived with Mormons in this part of the novel. And so the Mormons of the city, Salt Lake City, or town, whatever, at the time, but it is Salt Lake City, basically say, listen, you're gonna have to let your daughter. Wow, my display just went. That was terrifying. Why is this happening? Is it overheating or something? I don't know. I really don't know. I wish I did. But anyway, so the Mormons say, listen, you have to let your daughter marry one of these Mormons. And he says, and he writes to Jefferson Hope, who is the main sort of character in this part, who is the most important character in this part, rather. And he says, please come save me and my daughter. And so as the month goes by, each day, the number of days remaining is written somewhere on the house, or painted somewhere on the house, and it's very it's like mysterious. It's very thrilling. So you see, even in this is basically like a mini short story in itself, and that's what Doyle was very good at, was writing short stories. He was a prolific short story writer. So you can see his love for historical fiction and short story writing come through in this part of the novel, and it's quite cool. But what it really speaks to, because we get this backstory for Jefferson Hope, who is the actual perpetrator, perpetrator in the murder of two gentlemen. And that's what I've got, is that another gentleman was killed in the first half. There was a fellow named Staggerson, and I can't remember the other one's name. But it's not really that important. Anyway, so they're killed, and it's Jefferson Hope is the actual killer or murderer. But we get this whole backstory for Jefferson Hope, and it creates this almost sympathy for the character. By the end, you realize that it's he who killed the fellows. And you understand how he got to London over the course of a very long time. I'm not here to summarize the plot. I'm just here to talk about what makes it interesting. It's quite a cool tale. It has some chilling parts, like when one of my favorite parts is when Hope returns to Salt Lake City after he's heard that his love Lucy has died of a broken heart, and he takes the wedding ring off her and then almost disappears into the night. But anyway, what this kind of started was this duality, this equality between the investigator and the criminal, because neither character was completely one-sided. Whereas it's very easy to make the criminal superficial and one-dimensional in a crime story. Just saying, oh, he's evil, he kills people, or he needed money, so he killed someone. This, I believe, started the trend of like developing the criminal as a character with motivations and whatnot. And what's really interesting, I was reading about this earlier. I was reading about comics and the history of them, and it got to the part where the Comics Code Authority was introduced in the 1960s, which were a bunch of restrictions about what could be published as a comic, because they felt like it was giving kids and teenagers a lot of bad ideas. So instead of getting them shut down completely, the Comics Code of Authority, or the Comics Code Authority, I think it's Comics Code of Authority, was established as a way to save the medium without just completely dismantling it. So they could basically still be published, but they needed to follow some very strict guidelines. And one of those guidelines was that you can't have sympathy for the villain. You can't make the villain at all sympathetic. Which is... So, obviously a lot of narratives were very compromised by this. You couldn't tell as engaging or deep of a story, because they were very restrictive. Like no violence, no profanity, and no... You couldn't actually show the way that they... You couldn't explain how the crimes were committed. Like, you couldn't basically give a tutorial about how to do them, because it was very child-oriented. Like, you had to make it so sterile. And Swamp Thing was actually the first mainstream comic to break the Comic Code Authority's restrictions. But anyway, that's a story for another time. But I just think it's interesting how even this early, and this would be considered like popular fiction at the time, it's not... sure, it was an exercise in like writing something that was a little bit more engaging to write, because you have to think through a crime and whatnot. Sorry, I have an eyelash in my eye. But it was just published in like a normal serial or magazine, or those types of things. It was available to the public. They probably enjoyed it after a little while, because it wasn't immediately popular. But some people enjoyed it. As you can see, Watson's talking about Edgar Allan Poe's stuff and Gaboro's stuff. So they are known to be read. And comics in the 1960s were very popular to be read, very popular as a medium, right before they basically got slammed and dunked on by all the countries saying, listen, these are ruining our kids, mainly the US. But this early on, this is late 1800s, 1887. They are still looking at how you can make a sympathetic villain, and how you can build a story beyond just a mystery. And that's something that I think is very important. My display is going again. Why is this happening? I'm just going to have to investigate it after the stream. It doesn't seem to be influencing the actual streaming. It's just my reaction to it. So this does a very good job of building this whole narrative, and something that I've enjoyed a lot in something like Ace Attorney, which I've mentioned a few times now. But Ace Attorney has really fantastic mysteries, and they often involve a lot of like family drama and stuff that you're an outsider to as the player, and that you learn about. Not in everything, but a lot of them. Some of the highlights I'd say were in Ace Attorney. I've played all the mainline Ace Attorney games and some of the spin-offs, so I should be able to speak about this. One of my favorites... Okay, so the 6th game, I'm not a huge fan of, but it did have to explore like this whole country and its ideals or ideology. And the last case, the 4th case in its 2 parts, is quite interesting in that way. I like the 4th case a lot. My goodness. But Apollo Justice. Whoa! No, dude. What are you doing? I need that display to be alive. Oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry about this. I need to just address this technical issue on stream. Let me get everything back to where I want it to be. Sorry about that. But anyway, the fourth game, Apollo Justice, Ace Attorney. That one explores this whole family, and like basically the whole game's about it. Not the whole game, but I think most of the cases explore it. Yeah. I think, yeah, most of them. And that's kind of like similar. That's very similar, I'd say, to what's being done here in A Study in Scarlet. Which is what we're talking about. That's what this whole stream's about. Next week, we're probably going to do something else. I'm not sure if I'm going to do Time Machine, which I have read by H.G. Wells, or Dracula by Bram Stoker, which I haven't read, but I'd love to. So maybe we will do Dracula. That's what I'm kind of leaning towards. I would have liked to do more research for this stream, just to get more talking points and give more interesting facts, but I was quite busy. I threw this together like today, about an hour or so before stream, so I could probably do better if I just had an extra hour or two throughout the week, so I'll probably try to do that. But anyway, back to this. So it's very nice how they added depth to it, and also it changes it up, because it's quite boring to have one setting throughout a story, or it can be boring, rather. And so by changing it to America, it was quite a change of pace. I remember reading it and being like, what's just happened? It's kind of almost like Whiplash. But it works. I think it works quite well, especially because Doyle can write in both styles fairly well. He can write to like the English people, they're speaking and they're saying things like, oh, you remind me of them. And then you can also write like a pretty engaging Western. It's basically a Western. Basically. Yeah, so that's that. And then it all comes together quite nicely by the end. And you actually do have a very sympathetic villain by the end. I don't like using the word villain. I prefer antagonist. But you have quite a sympathetic antagonist by the end. Definitely. He does depict the Mormons as kind of... Is insidious the right word? But certainly surreptitious and a bit duplicitous. So that wasn't great. But the thing is, I read about this. The books that he was reading, because he read a lot, Doyle. The books that he was reading, a lot of it depicted the Mormons in a very negative light. So he believed that was just how they are. But as he came to learn more, he did apologize to a descendant of Brigham Young. Or is it Brigham? Brigham, sorry. I said Brigham. Brigham and Young. But he apologized to a descendant of Brigham Young. Personally, he said, I did not do that as well as I should have. But people make mistakes. And he did, like a few times, say, look, I was writing from what I thought was historical, and maybe in the way that I wrote it, it seemed a lot more sinister. That's probably the word I was trying to use earlier, than it necessarily was. He said it was something like, it can seem more visceral in a novel than in a historical work, which is true. Things definitely seem more horrific when a writer actually goes in and tries to make them more horrific sounding, at least. You know, that's the advantage of knowing your language and knowing how to manipulate your language and knowing how to manipulate your reader, which is what writers really have to do and have to be able to do. I'm just curious about how fast my Kindle's dying as well. But anyway, I'm going to close this. So, well, I don't really subscribe. I don't subscribe to any particular faith. Maybe Buddhism, but it's also a little bit like... it's less imposing on other people, but it's really self-imposing. And I don't necessarily agree that that's the way to achieve happiness. What you achieve there which is technically enlightenment. Like, you can describe it as enlightenment because that's what they call it. Is I don't equate that to happiness. But anyway, that's a completely different discussion for another time. Let's talk about adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. Let's talk about that for a little bit. So the biggest ones are probably Elementary, Sherlock, and the Sherlock Holmes movie franchise starring Robert Downey Jr. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I think those are the biggest adaptations of it. What is this song? I've just been having this Pokemon music in the background. Oh, this is from the new Mewtwo Strikes. No, wait, is it? Or is this from the old one? Oh yeah, this is from the old one. This is from the original Mewtwo Strikes Back, not the new one that was made for Netflix. Ah, that is the best Pokemon film by far. Anyway, none of the Pokemon films are particularly fantastic, but the first one's pretty good. I think maybe I'm just nostalgic. But anyway, so let's talk about adaptations. Sherlock did technically adapt the story in its pilot episode, A Study in Pink, haha. But it changes a lot of them. It takes away from a lot of what I believe makes the story strong, which is, you know, as we've spoken about, the sympathetic antagonist developing that story. And I mean, each Sherlock episode is basically movie length, so it's not like they could have it's not like they couldn't have developed it a little bit better, but they really focus on adding drama and making Sherlock more mysterious and like this wow, he's really brilliant, you should be paying attention, he's really important. They deify him basically, and that's what Stephen Moffat, as like a TV writer or showrunner, kind of falls into, is centering his narrative around the main character in a weird way. Like, it's for some people, it's not really for me. It implies a certain like superiority and significance that one person shouldn't ever have in the real world. Yeah. But anyway, that's something that I think makes the show weaker. But as a character development series, it does develop Sherlock, that version of Sherlock, because that version of Sherlock is like very different to the one in this original story that we're talking about, and you can basically say that they can be compared, they're comparable, because it is adapting that one, and it's the first appearance of both characters. But they develop in Sherlock, their Sherlock Holmes, into becoming more of a human person, or discovering humanity, I suppose. At times they do it well, at times they don't. But I prefer the Sherlock in this story, and throughout the rest of the Sherlock Holmes stories, because he's already human. He's just a bit of a strange guy. He understands people. He's cool, but he's not he's not overconfident or arrogant. Well, he is a bit overconfident, but I mean, he doesn't shove it in people's face. He's not obnoxious. That's really what it is. He doesn't get fed up with people for being slower than him, even though he does kind of like showing it a little bit. He does criticize Dupin for being a bit showy. He isn't that showy. He'll just say, like, he'll say his conclusion, and if people ask, he'll explain it. He does it a few times. He does it towards the beginning with the Racha and whatnot. Also, they in Sherlock, they intentionally just say, like, oh, the original twist was so bad. Obviously, it's like a Rachel or something. But, I mean, Sherlock does identify it as a ploy to just confuse the police. They were talking about how it might be a German spy. And they even started running with a news story, I believe, at one point, where that's said to be the case. But it's just a red herring. And Sherlock does see through it. But he does acknowledge that it's meant to be Racha German. And it makes more sense for the context, the historical context of late 19th century London. But anyway, otherwise, I'm trying to remember the first episode. They portray John kind of weirdly. Like, I'm not upset with the way they portray him. They do adapt like his stupefied expression whenever Sherlock impresses him. That went down pretty well. But it is a bit weird the way they developed that. It's a lot of I believe the term is queer baiting, which I don't really have much to say about, because I don't feel like I'm in a position where I can give a justified opinion on that. But anyway, I do ultimately prefer this version, the novel, over the TV one. But the TV one's still good in its own right. Don't get me wrong. I actually still enjoy the Sherlock series, but it's less of a detective mystery show and more of like seeing this guy who's portrayed as like basically a god become more human, and I think it works as a sort of character drama in that way. Yeah. Could you probably work out what is happening in this? Because that's like the joy of detective fiction, is being able to figure it out yourself. And I don't think you could have at all. I don't think you're ever given an opportunity in this one to come to the correct conclusion. You're never shown enough. My Pokemon music has ended. Let's just do this. Yep, I missed a letter. Dum bam bum bam bum bam bum bum. Oh, let's hear the sick ad for Stimroll. Fantastic. Oh, another one. 5-star. 5 stars if you want. Jubilife City. Oh, it's a lot louder now. Let's just turn that a little bit down. There we go. That's a nice volume. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, I still think you can enjoy Sherlock as its own thing. But yeah. Oh yeah, and in this you don't really have the opportunity to figure out. There are a lot of leaps and bounds that you have to make. That, I mean, Sherlock can believably make, perhaps, especially since he sent out his spies, his street Arabs, I believe they are, to go collect information. And he is presented with more information afterwards. But there's a lot of information that isn't presented to the reader that would allow them to actually come to that conclusion. And I don't know if that gets improved in later Sherlock Holmes stories. It might, but I think that's an important part of detective fiction, or the enjoyment of detective fiction, that involves the reader being able to figure it out. As you've seen, I've played a lot of detective games on my streams: Tangle Tower, Detective Grimoire, Frog Detectives. I think there's one more, but I can't remember it. You could kind of call Transistor like a mystery series, a mystery game, kind of. It's not an investigation game, but there is like some mystery to it, and I was trying to guess what was happening with the information presented to me. You can, you figure out more by reading the character bios, but yeah. I really like that game. I really like it. We're going to finish it this week. I promise. I hope I can promise that. If there's still more, then my goodness, I've spent a long time playing it. I thought that I could, the way I've been estimating how long I'll be playing a game on stream is I've been using How Long to Beat and using the average score. HowLongToBeat.com is a website that aggregates how long people take to finish games. And it's generally quite reliable, but I think I play a little bit strangely, and I'm gonna have to probably figure out some way to be a little bit more accurate with it if I want to plan better. But I'm looking forward to finishing Transistor, and I'm looking forward to the next game that we're going to play, which is probably going to be, I don't know, probably the Stanley Parable. It'll be a nice little break from the ARPG genre. It's an ARPG, right? I think so. It's quite cool though. Anyway, so that's going to be it for this stream. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about A Study in Scarlet. I think I got through like most of the points that I wanted to talk about. It would have been cool to have more people like ask questions or discuss things. But I mean, I enjoyed just speaking about it and talking about what I found when I was researching it. And I hope I recalled most of the most of the book relatively well. I didn't really have to. because I was mostly speaking in generally things and its significance to genre and whatnot, blah blah blah. But I did read it, and I really enjoyed it. And if you haven't read it, I really recommend it. I will probably be reading more Sherlock Holmes in the future, but I don't know if it won't be the next book club stream. It'll probably be like maybe next month. That's actually not that far away, but it'll probably be later. It'll be later, don't worry. So I think next week, let's read Dracula. I don't know, I don't think it's very long, but it's in the public domain, so you can still get it very easily. And that's good. Afterwards, I'll probably think up a more specific schedule or a more exact schedule in the weeks coming. But I'm just gonna lead you on each week talking about it. That way you can't cheat. You can't read it long beforehand, or you can't start reading it a long time beforehand. I want you to get a book out in a week. Basically, I'm trying to push. But they're not that long. I'm easing you into it. Maybe for longer stuff I will let you know in advance. But I'm definitely not going to be asking you like the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy for this week. I won't do anything like that. I respect people's time. But I do genuinely think that you can get through A Study in Scarlet easily within 2 days. If you just carve out, I'd even say like an hour each day. If you want to carve out less, you still would finish it in a week pretty comfortably, I think. Dracula, I don't know the exact page count. Let me actually check, because I believe I have it downloaded on this Kindle, which is on airplane mode. And I'm not going to take it off airplane mode for quite some time. But I believe I have it here. I have a few things downloaded. Also have the C. Auguste Dupin collection, so I can read that as well. Where is this one? Did I not download it? Oh no, here it is. I do have it. It is... Oh, it's actually quite long. Maybe? I don't know. How long is it? Oh, it could actually be quite long. Maybe we won't do Dracula. Or maybe that's just the way it's appearing in my Kindle is a bit strange. Let's go with the time machine then. Let's go with the time machine. We'll do the time machine. And that one's a short read. That one you'll definitely manage. I can talk about that. It has some interesting things to talk about. So I hope you'll join me for that. And I hope you enjoyed the stream. That was loud. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is going to be a fun thing going forward. I'm going to do a bit more research for future ones, I think, if I can. And hopefully more people will read the books. More people will be able to engage. Because talking... Just talking out of the top of my head is quite tiring. Anyway, until then, we're going to be doing Pokemon tomorrow, and I hope you have a good time, and check out any of the streams that will be coming this week. Thank you so much, and goodbye.